Welcome to Investing in Comic Books. On today's show, we are going to take a look at the comic book Iron Man #1 from Marvel from 1968. We're going to decide if this comic is worth investing. We're going to talk about the pros and cons. And based on the book series that we offer, you can check us out at hawknescomics.com for more information on this title and thousands more classic comic books from the Golden, Silver, and Bronze Ages. So, Iron Man #1, one of the most famous Marvel superheroes ever created. He finally got his own series in 1968 with this very issue. This series ran for decades, making this one of the longest running Marvel titles, starting with a #1. And this series was an offshoot of his original appearances in Tales of Suspense, where he was originally created in 1963, and he was in that series for 5 years before they ended the title and changed it back to a #1 issue to feature the main star, which Marvel did in 1968 with a number of titles. Now, Marvel Mania was in full swing at this time in the late 60s. Marvel was now selling as many comics as DC for the first time. And Tales of Suspense, featuring Iron Man, was about the 8th biggest selling comic for Marvel. And at that time, that was about 250,000 copies a month. So Iron Man #1 probably sold about the same amount of issues throughout the late 60s into the 70s. So what do we learn from that? Well, popular title, but of course lots of copies. And because this was the #1 series in 1968, this would have been one of the first widespread speculated titles that a lot of people would have hoarded copies, thinking that this would be valuable in the future. And of course, yes, it definitely is. But 45 years ago, the comic industry was new. There was not even a price guide yet. So let's look at a few key factors of this book. Not only is it a #1 issue, Iron Man's very own series with his own title, it also features a classic cover from Gene Colan. It also features the origin of Iron Man. And it's a story that continues from the one-shot Iron Man and Submariner #1, which had just been out the month before. The book also features Johnny Craig art. What's interesting about this book, automatically when I look at the CGC census, is that there are 2 copies graded 9.9. That is amazing quality copy, and very few comics from the 60s have ever achieved that high grade from CGC. So keep that in mind. 9.9 copies exist of this book. Those are the books that are going to sell for the big dollars in the future. In total, there have been 88 copies graded 9.6 or better as of the time I looked at the census. It'll be even higher now. And overall, over 2,100 copies in total graded by CGC. And Heritage Auctions has already sold 300 copies. Of course, this is a major key issue, so copies of it are sold all the time. And so that averages out to about 30 copies a year that Heritage sells. Or we could look at that as being roughly a copy every 2 weeks is sold in some condition. Let's look at the Overstreet Price Guide values for the past 5 years. The book has shown some steady increases. 2010 was a big year for Marvel Silver Age comics. All had big gains in the guide right across the board, and this book was also a winner from that. Before that, though, when the American market kind of crashed in 2008-09, the book stalled in value. It was slowly increasing before that. And looking at some lower grades, we'll see that, it's kind of been up or down, really hasn't made much of a difference in the lowest grades. So if you have a copy 6.0 or less, you really haven't made anything in the last 5 years. If anything, you've made $1 a year. So I don't recommend this book already for low grade. In fact, it's such a slow mover and there's so many copies out there. This is a book that you should be able to buy on eBay for under guide prices, just because there's so many of them out there. But high grade is another factor, and we're going to notice that right away when we look at some of the biggest sales ever through Heritage Auctions. They have sold a whole bunch of 9.8 graded copies. And let's look at some of those. One of the highest prices you'll see, $7,500 in 2012 for a 9.8. So that is almost 10 times guide, and you'll see that another copy, also in 2012, sold for over $7,000. Going back 5 years, a copy had sold for $5,500, and again, still way over guide. So what we're finding is an interesting thing. There are a lot of high-grade copies, but the demand is so high for this title that doesn't seem to matter. Supply and demand is greater than the supply for the high-grade copies. I haven't seen any of the 9.9 sell, but Heritage has sold, we can see 5 different 9.8s. And looking at the CGC census, we can see that not only is there 27 9.8s, but there's also 59 9.6s. So you'll see that just in very fine or better, we've already got 1,000 copies have been graded. So there'll be a lot more copies out there that haven't been graded as well. So this is definitely not a rare book. There's always going to be copies out there. So my concern with that, if you're investing in this book, is if you don't have that 9.9, 9.8, 9.6, you're kind of thrown in the market of saturation. There's so many copies out there still in existence and always for sale that for you to get above guide is going to be pretty hard to do ever. And if we go back, look at the Overstreet Price guide, we'll see that 9.0s and 9.2s have still done quite well over the last 5 years, gone up about 50% in 5 years. The 8s have gone up a little bit, but as I mentioned, 6 and below, really no movement. It's not an expensive enough book. So, summing up, what have we learned? We learned that there are a lot of copies, but supply and demand, the demand is higher than the supply, which is a good thing. This book does go up in value. It's going to become a $1,000 book here right away, and that is one of the newest Marvel comics to actually achieve that price for non-graded copies. The book is already 45 years old. The character is very popular in his own movie series, also in the Avengers. So becoming more and more a mainstream name, that is going to help the value of this book. And of course, you should watch for his first appearance and any early appearances that are pre-Iron Man #1. But of course, people like #1 issues. So if you're a fan of that and you want to start collecting a series from #1 up, this is a great book to get. Of course, as I mentioned, you can get low-grade reading copies for below guide. I think that's never going to change. And the high grades definitely bringing way over guide. So you have to decide the price market you're in and how long you're going to keep the book, and that will determine how well you're going to do with it. Do I recommend this book? Yes, high grade, I definitely recommend the book. Low grade, I definitely do not recommend the book for investing. If you'd like to learn more about other books and books in our series, we have published a series of 200 volumes that look at the history of comics and the rarity and investing in over thousands of books. You can check them all out at our website, hawknescomics.com. You can email me at hawknes@hotmail.com if you have any specific questions or suggestions. If there's a specific comic book that you would like to have me take a look at, I'd be happy to do that. And I always appreciate your feedback, good or bad. And remember, this is just a love of comics. We're trying to promote the history and some knowledge so that people make wise choices if you are going to spend your hard-earned money on comic books. Thanks for checking out this video, and check out all our others. We've got a whole series of them, and we're always adding new videos. This is Terry Hoknes. Thanks.